Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Real American History with your host, Tess Evans, public historian. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about government treaties with Native Americans. So, a little bit of background first. Since the first landing of white Europeans in America, their strategy was to expand their empire as much as possible, adhering to what King James I claimed was their divine right to settle new lands. Now, manifest destiny, a term you may have heard of before, was the idea that it was the divinely ordained right of the U.S. to expand its borders to the Pacific Ocean and beyond, which was the driving force behind the territorial expansion of the U.S. in the 19th century. But it was also used to justify the forced removal of Native Americans from their homes. So whites forced natives to move to different regions of the U.S. to make room for settlers. The best example of this, of course, being the Trail of Tears, where whites forced the eastern tribes in the U.S. of the Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole into Indian Territory, which is basically what is called Oklahoma today. Unfortunately, many died during this brutal trek. And this was all done under the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which then President Andrew Jackson signed into law. So then more removal strategies began to take hold in the form of reservations, many of which were actually controlled by the U.S. military, where natives were forced to live on land that was far from their original ancestral homelands. And much of it was unfortunately unfit to live on. But this was done by design, so that natives would have a hard time surviving, and that whites would get the fertile ancestral tribal lands for themselves. So all of this was done through treaties. Now, these treaties weren't grants of rights to natives, but a grant of rights from them. The tribes ceded lands and all of their natural resources in exchange for payments, goods, and services from the U.S. government. However, these payments and goods often either didn't come at all, or what came was nothing that the tribes could survive on, nothing to help them prosper. Sometimes they weren't even given food that was promised them through the laws of the treaties. Now, both sides broke rules of the treaties. Whites broke treaties as a way to continue seizing land for profit and settlement, and natives broke treaties because they resented being forced to live under white control. Many of the natives were starving, and thus resorted to stealing cattle and other livestock to feed their families. But whenever whites wanted to break treaties to get other things they wanted, they did so without batting an eye. As part of some of the treaties, for example, whites weren't allowed to come into regions of land where buffalo roamed, which buffalo, of course, was how a lot of the natives survived over centuries in the U.S., but whites did this anyway, and even hired men to kill the buffalo. So the last major treaty signed by the U.S. and Native Americans was the Fort Laramie Treaty in 1868, which established a reservation for the peoples called the Lakota that included all of what is now South Dakota west of the Missouri River. And it also designated the Black Hills as unceded Indian territory, which again is in the same region, for the exclusive use of native peoples. Whites weren't allowed on this land. The natives were allowed to live as they pleased in this region. But again, like so many others, whites broke this treaty, and in particular, when General George Armstrong Custer entered the Lakota land to search for gold. So that's it for today. I will post sources and links in the description for you to check out and learn more. If you have questions, comments, or would like to suggest an episode topic, you can email me at realahistory@gmail.com. See you next time for more Real American History.